Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointing on Sharp. Today we're taking a look at a Russian 6x4 bayonet, also translated to 6H4 depending on how you translate the Cyrillic. Now these are often referred to as the AK Type 2 bayonet in collectors circles, and as well as the AK-74 bayonet as well. Now, these were originally designed to fit the Russian AKM and later the AK-74. And are made by both Izhevsk and Tula from 1965 through until 1986. There were absolutely millions of these made. I have no idea exactly how many were made in total. And a lot of other countries made their own variations as well, like the Warsaw Pact countries and even some of the others like Egypt and Iraq and various other countries. For example, here's a Bulgarian one here, very, very similar. Already done a video on it, check it out if you haven't already. And the Russian ones, there were three major variations, or I say major, they were very minor variations in probably the efficiency of production. So I'll jump into the history. The 6x4 replaced the 6x3, which was essentially the same as what we have here. The scabbard was made of steel, the blade was identical, the crossguard was identical, but the handle was the big difference. So the handles are made of like a modern polymer. You'll hear people say they're made of Bakelite. That's unfortunately not true. I wish that they were, because Bakelite is hell cool. And the original ones had a pure polymer handle, didn't have a metal pommel, and they were prone to cracking and breaking, particularly when soldiers used them to, beat in tent pegs, use it as a hammer or something like that, use it as a utilitarian tool. So in 1964, they started experimenting and came up with this year, 1965, production started. Now, the very first type of these, now I say there's three types, but they are so similar that there's pretty much one type, but the very first type had a milled pommel and a milled crossguard. And the way you spot that, and I'll use my Bulgarian one as an example, is you can see the tool marks from the milling process, sort of like concentric scrape marks or tool marks. Whether this one here, as you can see, is cast. So this is actually the second type, and I'll get into that in just a moment. You see, it's sort of got that mottled, bubbly appearance to it, while the back of the press button here has tool marks on it, so it's been milled. And they were made from 1965 through until 1971, when they found a way to cheapen and simplify the process with the second type. So this one here is a second type, and they made these from 1972 all the way through until 1982. And what's different about them is both the crossguard and the pommel are cast, with the smaller pieces like the press button milled out, and the mortise here has also been milled out. So if we have a look at that, we've got tool marks on the top, but then on the side we have that mottled, bubbled, pitted, cast look. The crossguard has been pretty effectively polished and machined down, so it's not nearly as obvious. And finally, the third type were made from 1983 until 1986, and they're virtually the same as the second type, but they've got a slightly different pommel, and they're often referred to as like a lightened version by collectors. And essentially what you have is like a cutout down the base here. This portion is thinner. They're by far the rarest variation. They only made those for about 3 years, and in my opinion, they're the most desirable. In 1986, they started the replacement program for this bayonet with the new one, the 6x5, often also referred to as the AK-74 bayonet, and I've got one just here. So this is actually a Bulgarian one. I just lost my book off the side of the desk there. And as you can see, they're completely black, also made of a modern polymer, and they've got a really funky blade to them. I've actually ordered a Russian one of these. It's coming out of Ukraine at the moment. So with the conflict in Ukraine, there is a whole plethora of Russian surplus gear hitting the market. Unfortunately, with Ukrainian laws the way they are, you cannot export bayonets out of the country. So what they're doing is demilling them. So they're cutting the blades off, and all you get is the handle and the scabbard. And attachments if you're lucky. The one I'm getting doesn't look like it has any of the blade left at all. Sometimes they have a little bit of a stub, but even though they're essentially destroyed, they're still really cool, and I still rate them because you get all the markings like manufacturer's markings, serial numbers, unit marks, all that kind of thing, and they're still a part of history, and they're a part of this bayonet's, not this particular one, but the overall bayonet's history. So when you come across them in 50, 100, 200 years, you know that they've come out of Ukraine during the Ukrainian war, and they've been demilled and sold into surplus because they've got so much new stuff from the West. With that, I might jump into the operational service of the 6X4 bayonet, and they have seen a lot. So they obviously started in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets used them pretty much everywhere they went. They saw a lot of use in Afghanistan and other smaller conflicts they had. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russians continued using them, as well as new states like Ukraine, which were formerly part of the Soviet Union. Now, these are still being used today in the Ukrainian war. Very easy to find photos online of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers issued with these, particularly the earlier photos from the very start of the war. Now, both sides have a lot more stock of modern gear, particularly Ukraine being supplied by absolutely everyone. And on top of the Russian and the Ukrainian use, these pop up all over the world. So they were sold by the Russians to virtually everyone. They pop up all throughout Africa, the Middle East, Asia, everywhere. And there's quite a few of them coming out of Ethiopia at the moment with raw tiger imports. So if you're in the States, you can pick these up dirt cheap. I contacted them. They would not sell to me, which was a real pain in the ass. They don't ship internationally, but I've got one now. Now, I think it's time to discuss the construction of this bayonet. And this was, while it's a follow-on from the 6X3, it's still a very revolutionary design, and it was ahead of its time. It's a very utilitarian tool and a move away from a traditional bayonet, which was a long pointy thing for stabbing the bad guy and really nothing much else. So the handle and the scabbards are made of a advanced polymer. As I said before, you hear they're made of Bakelite, not true. And they can come in really beautiful shades of like a mixed mottled red and orange, and sometimes a deep dark red like I've got here. My Bulgarian one is a good example of sort of the mottled colours you can get, and they can be quite beautiful. In particular, generally the Bulgarian ones have the most appealing look to them. Now, they utilise the exact same blade as the 6X3, which is a stainless steel blade, long true edge, unsharpened false edge, sawback, and the cutout for the wire cutter with the scabbard. So very utilitarian. I know the whole clip point profile like this is prone to snapping. I haven't seen any Russian or Ukrainian or Bulgarian or any of these bayonets actually with snap tips, but I don't think they get used a terrible lot. Then moving down, we have our crossguard with a muzzle ring. So you'll note that it fits underneath the rifle with the blade pointing upwards, which is quite unique. Not many bayonets are fitted that way. And then down here we have a little hook, and that's for a tan canvas wrist guard, and it goes through that hole there. And while other countries have a combination of leather or different colours, the Russian ones were tan, and the little metal buckles can come in either like a nickel finish or painted black or like a darker finish. Then we have our polymer grip. It's two halves that are attached together, and underneath this plug there's actually a pin going through the base of the tang from the blade, and then they have these little plugs put in either side. Now, the tang of the blade is not connected to the pommel, so it is insulated. You can hold the handle and the scabbard and cut electrified wire without worrying about electrocuting yourself, which is quite a nice little feature. And as you can see, the pommel is just screwed on right there with a big flathead screw. And then we just have our milled out mortise with our press button. The press buttons can be quite stiff like this one is. Sometimes you can't press them at all. And when these were molded, they actually have mold numbers. So you might be able to see this one here is mold number 7. I I've got a fantastic book. This one here, and it goes through just a whole bunch of the other different markings, and there are so many different markings on these. I'll cover the basics, but typical Russians, there's just a million different variations to their markings, so it's impossible to cover absolutely everything. I should also point out that the crossguard is actually riveted on, so there's two rivets in the middle here, and they've been quite effectively concealed on this one, where it's been machined down and I think blued over the top. And you see that in about 25% of these. About 3/4 of them, the two rivets are really prominent and quite obvious, but you do come across them in this configuration as well. Moving down to the scabbard, we've got our wire cutter, our little end stop for the wire cutter down there, and our cutting piece. We've got our reinforced ribs in the polymer, and then we've got a throat with an internal spring to put tension on the blade to retain it, and a detachable frog. And the Russian ones come in a brown leather. This one's actually Bulgarian. It's from my Bulgarian bayonet, but I touched it for the purpose of this video. And obviously you can detach it, so you can use it as a wire cutter while this remains attached to your belt. And then typical AK frog, it's just got a little snap there and a belt loop there. Very, very simple. Now, I think the only other thing that I really need to discuss is the markings, and the markings can be really confusing. There's some really obvious and simple ones, and then there's some really nuanced ones. So we'll start with the really obvious ones, and that's the manufacturer's marks. So there's two manufacturers, Tula and Izhevsk, and Tula, their manufacturer's mark is a star with an arrow in it. And that will typically be on the handle and on the scabbard, and it'll be a raised section that's molded in. Then you've also got Izhevsk, which is a very similar mark, except theirs is a triangle with an arrow in it. And again, you'll find that on the scabbard, and the one I have on this bayonet has actually been removed, and you can kind of still see it. You probably won't pick it up, but you might notice that there's a difference, like an abraded section there. There's been abraded horizontally, and you don't see that on the rest of the handle. So it's just that section, and that's where it would have been. So for whatever reason, someone has sanded that marking off, which is a real shame for me. Then you'll also get serial numbers. So with the serial numbers, they'll be electro-penciled into the bayonet and the scabbard. Usually you'll have the full serial number down here, and then you'll have the last 3 digits on the back, and usually on the handle, but this one is on the blade. And those 3 serial digits, or serial number digits, are really what pointed out to it being Russian. Now you might notice that the light plays a bit funny on this serial number and that portion of the blade only, and that's because it has actually been sanded and polished, so a previous number has been removed and a new one put over the top. That's also evidenced by the fact that I've got a partial serial number there, as well as a painted number, and then I've also got another number that was horizontal across there. So this has been issued and reissued a number of times with many different serial numbers on it. Now, as I previously discussed, when they mold the pommels for the Type 2 and Type 3s of this style of bayonet, they have a mold number. And most of the other ones I've seen have been double digits, but they do come in single digits like this number 7 here. Now, the 3 other kind of markings I'll cover. First off, we've got our inspection stamps, and you get those on the pommels. So this one has a diamond, which is incredibly common, and then you can also get reissue further inspection marks. So you'll have like a diamond and maybe a rectangle or an oval or something on there as well. This one is really faded and difficult to make out, but it is there, and the diamond is predominantly used by Izhevsk, which is consistent with the other markings I've got on this and the scabbard as well. Now we also have mold numbers. There we go. So they'll always be on the back of the scabbard, about 5 centimeters up from the base. This one is 3.7, and you'll also find them with dashes and slashes. And my understanding is that if it has a dash, it's for Tula, and if it doesn't have a dash and maybe it has a slash, it's Izhevsk. I'm pretty certain that's how it works, but I could be wrong. And finally, there was another kind of inspection stamp put on these as well. So sometimes inspectors would use like a really durable ink, and they would stamp an ink inspection mark just under the cross piece here. And I've seen a couple of different variations of that, and I've also seen them inside the slot in here, but this one doesn't have any of those. I probably should have pointed out with our molded manufacturer's marks, the places you find these are the base of the scabbard, but then when you come to the handle of the bayonet, predominantly you find them just here on the right hand side, but sometimes you also find them up here underneath the crossguard as well. And I have seen a couple that have been completely unmarked, but I suspect that they're like this one where it's been sanded off completely. Anyway guys, that's all I've got to really say about this bayonet. It's really cool. I'm happy I got it. I picked it up dirt cheap on eBay. Someone was just selling it as an AK bayonet. They didn't see the markings and noticed that it was Russian and probably worth a little bit more. Now, historically, these have been quite difficult to get and very expensive, but with current hostilities and stuff coming out of Africa, the price is certainly coming down. And while trashed, you can get the Ethiopian ones dirt cheap if you're in the States. And if you're happy with demilled ones from Ukraine, they're like 20 bucks on eBay. They are really, really cheap. So that's why I picked up 6x5, because a Russian one of these will set you back like, $300-400 bucks. But a demilled one, 30 bucks, and I can go through, do a video, show you all the markings, and it's also a fantastic example of something that's come out of Ukraine. Anyway guys, that's all I've really got to say about this bayonet today. If you've enjoyed the video, drop a like, and if you have any further information or made any mistakes, as always, comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.